Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight, a show designed to highlight diverse perspectives, next generation initiatives, emerging trends, and innovative thinkers in the international higher education community. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts, a 20-year veteran in global education, previously director of international ed at Johnson County Community College, but now I'm the director of partner marketing at Podium Education. Before I introduce today's guest, let me first introduce you to our sponsor, On Call International. On Call International is a worldwide travel risk management and emergency assistance firm that serves over 20 million travelers globally, including students, faculty, and staff from hundreds of institutions of higher education. On Call's mission is to help travelers and their institutions every day, whether it be a medical emergency, security issue, or even a more common travel problem like a canceled flight or a missing passport. When you work with On Call, you're gaining a trusted partner who truly cares about you, your travelers, and your institution. If you want to learn more, On Call is now offering Gateway Spotlight listeners a free travel risk management assessment. This is a detailed analysis of your institution's current policies and procedures, along with practical written recommendations for improvement. You can contact the On Call team at trm@oncallinternational.com to book your complimentary assessment today. You can also visit oncallinternational.com to learn more about On Call's fully customizable travel risk management and emergency assistance services for higher education. I know as an administrator, this would be a super valuable tool for me at an institution that I would be working at. So I highly recommend you take advantage of this fully free risk management assessment from On Call. Thank you so much to On Call for sponsoring the Gateway Spotlight today. Now let's head back to the show. Today, we're talking to two pretty major players in the world of health, safety, risk management. And we're talking about the duty of care white paper that was recently compiled by Gateway International Group. And this white paper is essentially what I would call a senior international officer's playbook and is an incredible tool for all professionals in international education who need to understand the key decisions, questions, and risks of running global programs. And so we will have a link to that in the show notes, and it's free for anyone to download and take a look at. So if you're listening to this later on, you can download that and read along as we have this discussion. I'm really excited to have two incredible people on the show today to talk about this topic. We have Julie Pollard. Julie Pollard has 18 years of experience in the study abroad sector. She has held public-private partnership posts with universities in the United States, Turkey, and India. In 2021, she joined the University of California as the Director of International Health, Safety, and Crisis Management after spending the last decade posted in Turkey for a private sector study abroad organization. She has on-the-ground operational experience in nearly 80 countries. So basically, she's seen it all. So our next guest is Dr. Kyle Rausch, who you've seen on the Spotlight before. He's an experienced education abroad professional whose work has focused on the oversight of faculty-directed education abroad programs, including the development of program leader training and institutional risk management policies and protocols. Currently serving as the executive director of the Study Abroad Office at the University of Illinois at Chicago, Kyle has also developed institutional risk management policies for international travel, managed the response to emergencies affecting international travelers abroad, and taught and led student groups on site in Europe. So both of these people are going to bring the knowledge and all the knowledge bombs to this topic. And we're going to try, to make risk management one of the more, exciting topics. We're going to make it super fun.
We don't say bombs in this space.
Oh, right. For sure. Yeah. Very knowledge drops. We'll just say knowledge drops. Yeah, there you go. So before we sort of dive into, the list of questions and topics we want to break down today, why don't you both give us a breakdown of your offices and institutions and the scope of who you're serving and the types of programs you're running and overseeing, staff size, et cetera. So Julie, we'll start with you.
Sure. So currently, the University of California Education Abroad program is a system-wide unit. So it serves all 10 campuses, but we predominantly work with the 9 undergraduate campuses, which totals about 230,000 students. Pre-COVID, UCEAP hosted about 6,000 students annually on over 400 different academic programs in over 40 countries. Currently, my unit is 4 people, full-time staff. We are adding a 5th very soon. I'm getting an international pre-departure coordinator, which is a very exciting position. And I've been in this role for over a year at this point. And I think one thing that's really challenging for me as a new person coming in from private sector into public higher education is how different things are across the system. It's a big system, it's very complex. And navigating through each campus's way of doing things has been a real learning challenge for me.
Thanks, Julie. And so me representing University of Illinois, Chicago, I was surprised to learn when I moved here 3 years ago that UIC is actually Chicago's only public research university. So it's very critical to our mission that we're serving all students who live in the Chicago area. And as such, that makes us an MSI. So we have the HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution designation, and a PZ. That was a new one for me, but basically it means we serve high percentages of Asian American, Native American, and Pacific Islander students. We have a student body that exceeds 31,000 students, undergraduate, graduate, and professional schools, 16 colleges and schools in total. In terms of study abroad, prior to the pandemic, we were sending about 250 students abroad annually. So obviously there's a lot of work to be done. I'm excited to say that I was brought on in May of 2020 to really help with the expansion of short-term programming. Given our diverse student body, we do believe that this model holds a lot of promise for our students. And in terms of maybe a challenge we're facing in this area, I know a lot of institutions are fortunate to have a Julie. We do not yet, and I hope one day we do. So in the absence of there being a dedicated risk management professional, that really falls squarely on my office, both for study abroad activity, but also increasingly other types of mobility activities that are happening at the institution. So it's really requiring me and my staff to upskill in this important area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So obviously you're both, at public serving institutions, but obviously at very different scales, but both quite big. One of the things that, especially in the, during the COVID crisis, but even beyond, I feel like a lot of people think that COVID was the first thing that's ever happened in education abroad that made us think about these things. No, we've been thinking about these things for decades, but COVID sort of really brought everything, every component of health and safety and risk management and evacuation, all of it became hyper-focused. I think over the last few years, there's been 5,000, health and safety workshops, lots of white papers like the one that Gateway has produced. And then, of course, there's always been best practices from the forum and NAFSA, et cetera. So for people who don't have the bandwidth, who don't have a full-time person or don't even have, several staff in their office to focus on this, what would be some of your sort of quick wins, things to look at first for an office who wants to, roll into October, for instance, feeling okay, I feel like we're moving in the right direction? What would be those quick wins you guys would recommend? And Kyle, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And, I think our field benefits by being very collegial in nature. So I'd say start by reaching out to those who are doing it well. We've got some really great organizations in the field, such as the Forum on Education Abroad, which is the standard setting body for the field. And some of their resources are only for members, but they are doing a lot of great work to make those critical ones, especially related to COVID-19, available to those institutions who can't maybe be a member at this time. But even beyond Forum, we've got Gateway, we've got to do a shameless plug for that is putting a lot of great resources out, NAFSA. But then even within your regional communities. So here in the Chicago area, we started the Chicago Education Abroad Professionals Group, primarily as a medium for us to share resources we were developing internally at each of our institutions related to COVID-19 waivers, new language that had to be added, or just to ask questions, how is your institution handling the decision-making process for whether or not to send groups out? And I find that people have been more than ready to share what it is that they have developed at their institutions. And I'd say, resources is a key part of this. As you said, Brooke, not all of us are fortunate enough to have a full-time risk management professional. So really what you can be doing as you collect these resources and nuggets of wisdom from your colleagues is building your case. And that's exactly what I've tried to do here at UIC. we were not sending students abroad for the first 2 years of the pandemic because we were tied to Department of State advisory levels. And when Forum was here in Chicago last spring, my sole focus was on talking to people, see if I could get them to share their risk matrices with me. So that way I could develop a really solid proposal for my SIO. Thankfully, he was willing to hear me out. I had some good data to back about what other institutions were doing, and we were finally able to resume study abroad. So yeah, I think checking in with the key players, your stakeholders up and down the road from where your institution is to see what it is they do and how they got to that.
Yeah, that's great. What about you, Julie?
I would second what Kyle had said about the Forum on Education Abroad. The standards of best practice are available free, right? I am all about reminding folks of what resources are available without cost. So one of my favorites is the OSAC's Academia Sector Group. Great free resource. Any US-based institution can join OSAC for free, the Overseas Security Advisory Council. The academia sector is now the largest sector that's in OSAC. Great resource, a Google group, lots of communication, and you have access to a lot of reports that OSAC analysts produce. It's great intelligence, and I think it's really helpful, particularly in countries where we have a large number of US students going, or just US-based travelers going in general. There's a significant number of analysts that just work on Mexico. Some of the reports that come out around the different states in Mexico, the intel, it's very good, very comparable to what I see with our private sector security vendor. You're muted.
Sorry, excuse me. But I think that's a really great point, especially kind of getting at what you said, Kyle, about you as an institution, we were held by like the top line State Department, rules about where they were putting a country at a specific level. But then having a resource, like you mentioned, Julie, that is drilling down at a much more granular level. So instead of saying all of Mexico is not safe for travelers, for instance, they might say, well, it's really these pockets. And as long as your program is not near those regions, you're probably still safe and protected. So I think that's a really good reason to kind of going back and like making those proposals and making the case for programs being able to go. I think that's a really, really great resource that you mentioned. So if we were to sort of triage, if you will, or I guess rank in order of, an office and like the things they should have in place. I mean, would you say, hey, you need to have an international insurance policy of some kind in place that's for students and faculty and staff traveling? Would it be, no, you need a really robust faculty training process and system like Kyle's worked on developing? Or would it be more of the student preparation and the risk management? Or would it be more of the country level analysis that you think it should be the first thing people do? Like if you were to triage those things, what would be the first thing you would put in place?
Insurance, absolutely. Travel insurance is key.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's your own, whether it's the partner organization that you're working with, the country policy of where the traveler is going, whatever that policy is, the traveler and you as an administrator should understand that policy. What are the exclusions? What are the eligibility criteria? What are the limits? And just be informed. Part of our job is mitigating the risk with things like insurance, but the other part of our job is informing of risk. And so many of these good travel policies now come with intel pieces, right? They come with information that the traveler can access when going to a particular country. I'm a big fan of more information is better. I like to encourage travelers to research all different types of information. Identity-based advice right now is really a hot topic, I think, and oftentimes they're not going to find their particular identity or identities in any one research place. They might need to check a couple of different sources. So I'm partial to advising travelers to check in as many places as they can, be as thorough as possible.
Agree. What about you, Kyle? What's your first thing you would do on that list?
Well, you stole my thunder, Julie. Insurance is number
Okay, then what's
one.
number two? What's number
But
two?
number
Yeah.
two, I'm a big believer in written policies and procedures. Surprise, surprise, the administrator says I know. But when an emergency happens, I can't tell you how helpful it is to have kind of a checklist of things because you're emotional, right? Your stakeholders are likely emotional. It's an intense environment. You want to have something you can pull out that's been reviewed before, practiced before, that you can kind of lean on. And to go along with that is really an identification of stakeholders. So I get it. For institutions just starting out, you're not going to be able to map out the whole playbook, right away, and that's fine. But start to think about if X happens, who else at your institution or organization do you need to bring in? And start engaging them in dialogue because they might not know the full extent to which the institution or organization is involved in certain international activities.
100%. I totally agree with that. And I think too, if it's overwhelming to sort of think like, oh, I have to have this whole policy thing, it's like call your peer institutions and, the director of the other, minority serving urban public institution director and say, hey, do you have a policy document that I could look at and obviously cite and sort of use as a starting point? Because I think a lot of times people are scared to just kind of start from scratch. And I think there's, we're all kind of creating in a silo, but at the same time, there's a lot of overlap. And as long as we give credit where credit is due, I think we can all kind of lean on each other in that regard too. If you're nervous about just like writing policy out of thin air.
There's so much wisdom in that, especially if your institution is part of a system like mine is. I've learned very quickly that they're going to ask me, have you checked what Urbana-Champaign's doing? So now I just kind of beat them to it and check in with them anyways. And then it's helpful because I have a framework from which I can build my own on, right?
Right. 100%. Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit. Let's focus our attention a little bit on this duty of care, SIO and the Headwinds white paper that Gateway put together. And Kyle, you were on that team that put that together, and I was reviewing it a couple of weeks ago and going through it. And I'm pretty experienced in international education, and one of the things I was kind of like, interesting. It's things I had never thought of. And I don't know if I should be embarrassed by that, but there was a lot of information about regulatory compliance. I'm just like using a big umbrella term there. And from anything from like your ability to like function as an institution or as a business in that country or jurisdiction. I mean, there's a lot there that I thought, oh, maybe somebody higher paid than me was thinking about those things, but I definitely didn't. Where like talk us through some of those things and like what in the team that you were working on, why did you find those things super important? And what were maybe and that or other things that came up as you were compiling this document that you think that people really needed to understand that might often be overlooked, whether it's regulatory compliance or something else?
Well, Brooke, you shouldn't feel embarrassed because that's the reason we wrote the white paper. We realized that a lot of us who've gotten in the field of international education are coming at this from very different backgrounds or disciplines where we didn't have education in these, and why would we have, right? But because of I think a lot of this relates to what we're seeing in politics and the changing of the guard, if you will. There is definitely an increased focus on compliance and these regulatory issues. Some of the big ones we see cropping up concern international data privacy laws, right? GDPR rocked our world a few years ago, and now China's personal information protection law came about, I think it was last November, and there's other countries who are slated to adopt similar regulations. So institutions have to be ready. I think too, as more and more US-based organizations and campuses try and expand their global reach and have actual facilities or campuses abroad, knowing the legalities of, do you have jurisdiction to operate a campus there or award degrees? These are things that need to be addressed. What about your hiring practices? You've got to make sure that you're following the law to be able to hire the faculty in the country. And, it goes from things not only about compensation and retirement, but even down to holidays. You have to give those staff and faculty teaching on your programs abroad the national holidays off that they need. As I think about the future of international education and what COVID kind of spurred, I believe, is this focus on online global learning, I suspect there's going to be a lot more regulatory structures coming down regarding, this idea of borderless education. Well, in fact, there will be borders, and those will apply to online global learning. And so really the book's yet to be written on that, but it's definitely something that's on my mind that I think we're all going to have to continue to monitor as online global learning continues to take off. And Brooke, with your new role, I'm sure you're going to be leading the way in some regards with that too, right? So there's a lot on institutions' plates to think about when it comes to regulatory compliance, and it's only going to get, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's only going to get tougher.
Well, Julie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because obviously, this is the focus of your role. Has this regulatory compliance kind of conversation and challenge been part of part of what you've been focused on? Is it new, or is you're like, this is an old hat?
I think it just gets more complex over time. Anytime you want to institute a new process or introduce a new supporting product or vendor service, you always have to consider the data privacy. How we transfer information simply to our insurance company has to go through a particular protocol to ensure data security. There's just additional steps that you have to take in an already complex process in order to make sure you are in compliance. So I do think for smaller institutions or institutions that don't have as much support staff or other staff that you might have to interface with, if they're not as familiar with global programming, with global operations, you can be the thorn in their side a bit. And learning how to build your network and have people understand and be empathetic to what you're trying to do and ensure that you're following best practices, not just at your own institution, but from the US government, from the host country data laws. It can be a real uphill battle. So it's nice to not have to do those things alone. So if you can educate folks in your network within your campus, I think that's a great step.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I always like to do is get, as informed about the issue as it relates to global education as I can, and then have a conversation with legal counsel for the whole institution or, that department to say, hey, you're the legal experts here, but here are the challenges or the potential problems that could arise as it relates to that topic. And I need you to dive into that. And typically they're in my experience, they've been just very grateful that I brought it even to their attention in some cases, because maybe it just hadn't hit their purview yet, or they just didn't realize maybe how global education even fit with that particular bigger issue. And so I think don't be scared to reach out to your campus resources in that regard and sort of say, hey, we're on the same team here. Let's make sure that the institution as a whole is ready to go with some of these things. So I wanted to ask you, Julie. So I did a little deep creep on you on the internet, and I found sort of a workshop, an interview that you had done a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago. And you were talking about how important the use of technology is in the work that you do. I know that you work with a particular partner, and there's some technology component with them in terms of managing, student communication on the ground and all sorts of wonderful things. But I would love for you to maybe talk a little bit about how you sort of initially saw the use of technology, how you got people excited about adopting technology, which sometimes can be challenging in institutions, and what have been some of your big wins with deploying technology in the sort of health and safety space.
Sure. So I inherited a vendor contract, which has been really fantastic. The intel, the updates that travelers receive from the security vendor, I could never put those things together myself in the time that they do it and in the volume that they do it. I'd have to hire a whole room full of analysts in order to be able to do that. It provides concrete advice on particular situations. This morning was the Queen's funeral procession. So I received an update this morning telling me exactly where in London they anticipate delays, what was happening with the rail network, why were things not working out of Paddington, all kinds of very concrete, actionable information. My challenge right now is not getting the administrators on board with the technology, because they see the value in it. We have a very high number of students. We cannot be communicating one-on-one with every single student. We don't have the staff capacity. Now we're in this odd situation where students receive so much communication from us, from their home campus. If they register in STEP, the US State Department Traveler Enrollment Program, which we always encourage them to do, they also get alerts from that organization. It's a lot of communications pieces. And it's hard to sift through all of that and figure out what's worth my time reading, what's not, what annoys me. And if you're a student looking at your inbox with over 100 things from school, what do you choose to read? So right now we're working on educational pieces that help to inform travelers during the pre-departure phase, how to read these alerts, why they should be reading these alerts, the types of behaviors that they could use and implement from reading these alerts. So that's where we're at now. That's a little bit of the pain point.
Interesting. Kyle, do you have any like technology that you've been deploying that's been successful, or something you're flirting with deploying?
Yeah, we actually, right when I onboarded transition, we went from paper-based applications to electronic applications. So
in 2020, wow.
So I from where I sit, everything is just getting better in spades. But one of the aspects of the tool we went with includes a travel safety app that our travelers can download. And it sounds like in much the same way Julie's technology works, provides our travelers with real-time in-country intelligence, where, again, we don't have a risk management person that I can lean to. So it's just nice to know that our travelers are getting the information they need while they're abroad. We're not having to be the ones to chase up all the information and put it together in a report. So that's a tool I think that's really going to take off for our travelers.
So I wanted to shift gears a little bit, kind of come back to like the inner workings of sort of risk management planning. And one of the things you talked about in the duty of care white paper that you put out is this concept of, institutional turf wars. And I think as I say that term, I think anyone listening is probably like, oh yeah, I've been there on a myriad of topics. Maybe you guys can describe, and you don't have to go and, you don't spill a tea, but maybe you can describe some of the components of any kind of turf wars that you have experienced in developing sort of a larger risk management plan. And how did you figure out how to sort of maybe avoid some of those landmines, or even just mitigate the outfall of that? Those processes. Julie, do you want to share your experience with that?
Sure. I think the first thing that's really important is just networking, getting to know your colleagues, counterparts across the institution, stakeholders, people that you would need to communicate with in a crisis, helping them to have confidence in you, in your work, in the tools that you have, in the policies that are written, the procedures, so that there isn't intimate knowledge of what would happen, but they have the confidence in you, in your office, to help guide them in this process if a crisis were to occur. I have a lot of stakeholders across my system. It's entirely likely that an event in a European country would involve all 9 undergraduate campuses plus the Office of the President. That's a lot of people to communicate back to. I would prefer that they be able to trust me in working through the issue, communicating back when there's important pieces of information, that we're following the procedure, that we're using the tools that we have at our disposal to responsibly manage the crisis. So networking by far.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, any strategies that you would share?
Yeah, so I've worked at 3 very large state schools, and the winning strategy I've landed on is don't waste your time if you have this luxury. I know it's not always kids, but don't waste your time with the ones who don't get it. Start with the ones who are coming to you and want to work together, and build something that the others just can't deny. I mean, this just happened at my institution. When I first arrived, there was a unit who everyone knows was doing their own mobility programs and did not want to play ball with the Office of Global Engagement. I had an initial meeting when I got here. They didn't want to talk with me at all. So I concentrated with some other units, got some successful programs launched. Well, 2 weeks ago, got a call from this unit. Hey, we heard how successful the program was. Can we chat now? Of course we can. So sometimes you just have to win them over by showing your successes with other units. If you're on a campus like mine, where there is some competition between units, you can kind of use that to your advantage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are amazing, amazing recommendations. I co-sign on those. So we don't have a lot of time left, and so I wanted to talk. I want two things I wanted to still cover in this conversation, and one is kind of more turning on internally, I guess, as operators in international education and administrators. The last several years has been stressful for everyone across the world, but I think in our field, it's been very stressful and overwhelming and scary in some capacities. A lot of us, we've lost staff in some instances, or other resources to help us, tackle these challenges. And so I think there's just a lot of burnout, and especially thinking about like the worst case scenario in international education all the time, because we do have to think about those things and then reverse engineer from there. What have been some of your strategies, or either personally or with nurturing and supporting your teams that you work with on these issues, of helping them kind of cope and relieve some of that burnout and stress, and kind of find that fire and excitement and passion that likely brought us all to this industry and to this space in the first place? And Kyle, I'll start with you.
Yeah, this strikes a personal chord with me because there have been multiple times these past 2 years where I just wondered, do I have it in me to stick it out? And something that's really helped me recently is establishing boundaries. And I think there's a lot of folks, friends, colleagues in the field I've talked to. There probably is something about our profile where we're helpers, right? We want to find solutions. We want to make things work out. But sometimes we run the risk of burning ourselves out, as you said. So standing up for yourself, knowing when you have to call it quits at the end of the day so you can show up tomorrow and do your job, is really allowing yourself that kindness to set those boundaries. The other thing I would say is participating in professional development opportunities where you can network, as Julie said, with colleagues. That has also helped me. One, just knowing I'm not alone. I'm not the only school who wasn't allowed to send students out, that I'm not the only one having to have these difficult conversations with our senior leadership. There's power in that. And I would come back, even though it's carving out time and space to attend these events, it really did help me come back feeling motivated, like, okay, I can do this. And then the last thing I'd say is find your Northern Star. For me, it was developing a brand new first year abroad program. That was the thing that made me happy in my job. When I could work on that, when I had a bad day, I would just focus on that program and it would bring me out of the not so glamorous stuff. So those are some of my tips.
Love it. What about you, Julie?
I would second that professional development piece. My unit is a 24/7 emergency response unit. So it is hard for us at times to draw boundaries. It's hard to just turn everything off because you don't ever actually get to turn everything off. So making that space to feel excited about your work, feel empowered and impassioned. I encourage my staff to join the Global Leadership League. The mentoring circles, I think, are a phenomenal program. I did a few of them myself and I loved it. Being able to engage in other types of things like the Forum Health and Safety Institute, which is really the premier event in our fields. All the folks in my office are members of Pulse. Pulse is such a great resource, and it's a good place to engage in professional development and professional conversations. At the beginning of COVID, when I worked at a provider group, we started the Provider Collective. And it was a Tuesday call where everyone got together. We talked about our issues that we all were having. It was part therapy. It was part problem solving. It was trying to keep everyone focused that, there is a future for study abroad. It's going to happen. We're all going to need to shift. It allowed us to have conversations that we might not normally have had as a group of somewhat competitors. Things like, how is climate change going to impact our work in 5 years? Are we going to need to be more cognizant of the fact that Europe might have heat waves and it's not feasible to teach an arts class in Florence between 12 noon and 3 p.m. every day in the summer, right? To be able to have those conversations and forward thinking, it was great. It was a great act in futuring, and it was also therapy. I really appreciated it. So find your place. It doesn't have to be in one of the professional spaces in our field. It could be somewhere else. Brooke, I know you're a big yoga enthusiast. So find your passion and your hobbies as well to be able to separate yourself and be a healthy all-around individual person, not just an international education professional. There's more to our identities than just that.
Yeah, I have to, snaps for Julie on that, like finding that spark that has nothing necessarily to do with administering global education. I 100%. And I think too, like even, kind of relates to global education, but finding your spark in your excitement about discovering new cultures and experiences, like even just like going to the Asian food market in your town that maybe you never went to, but you love going to China, but you just never thought to go to the local Asian food market. Like those little things like that, I think for me have always been that little dose of, oh, this is what got me excited in the first place about my own experience. And these are the little moments I want students to have. I think those things have always been really powerful for me to sort of stay like, oh yeah, I might be frustrated with whatever office, the registrar right now on transfer credit, but those little moments can kind of bring me back to that center, like you said, that North Star. So we're going to wrap it up with sort of shining the spotlight, if you will, elsewhere. So obviously both of you, leaders in health and safety and risk management, doing amazing work at your institution. So I encourage everyone to go deep creep their websites and see all the great stuff that they're doing, connect with them on LinkedIn to pick their brains. But I'd love for you two, since you're sort of the insiders of the inside of this, to maybe shout out some institutions that you think are also doing some really great work and just have a wonderful model of how they approach this, that other people could go explore what they're doing. Like, who would you shine a spotlight on? And Julie, I'll pitch it to you.
Sure. I think it's worth mentioning what the forum is doing. Marissa Lombardi is doing a great job. I think she's the executive director of programs and training, I think is her full title. She's doing a great job on curating a lot of programming that speaks to management of risk, health and safety issues. So I really applaud what they're doing there. Also, Gateway, honestly, the duty of care paper was fantastic. It was such a great resource. And I think for a lot of folks in our field, you don't know what you don't know, right? Someone has to tell you about it. Years and years ago, Bill Hoy wrote a paper around court cases and study abroad. No one has done an update on that since.
I have referenced that so many times in my career. You're right. 100%. That's an amazing resource. Everyone go look it up. Yeah.
And there are so many folks that are new to our field that don't have that historical memory of what happened on Semester at Sea, of what happened with the Hotchkiss case, or even recently the RISD case. We are learning from litigation outcomes. And I think it will help to inform our practice in the future. So paying attention to court cases, having great relationships with your Office of General Counsel if you can, reading the Gateway Duty of Care paper, I think is a great starting point.
What about you, Kyle?
Well, I've got to use this time to thank the people I leaned on when I was working on our newer risk process. So Patrick Morgan at University of Michigan, I mean, anytime I get to connect with him at a conference, he just has so much wisdom to share. Our program partner, CEA, they were very kind and jumped on calls with me and shared their risk outlook. And then CIEE2, they developed their own health risk index, and that was one of our data points for our newer risk matrix. So I'm curious, I know they recently stopped that because of the intel in many countries changing. So I'm curious to see what they'll cook up next, because that was a big help to the field.
Yeah, those are great. And I will just, plug kind of piggybacking on what Julie just said, is that the duty of care, while I did talk about, it mentions the regulatory thing, and that is in there, and it is super interesting. Previously, way back in the day while they were still working on the white paper, Kyle and a couple other people who were working on that, we did talk about some other components of that white paper, specifically that that decision-making kind of matrix, if you will, of go, no go kind of process of like, do we send them? Do we not send them? Do we bring them home? Do we not bring them home? And sort of a laundry list of questions to ask yourself to make that kind of decision in your program. So there's a lot inside that white paper beyond the regulatory stuff, I promise. So I encourage everyone to go download that and take a look. And, of course, Gateway would love your feedback on it too, if you have any other insights on it as well. And so we're going to wrap this up. Thank you both so much for joining me in this conversation. I think we did a good job of making it interesting and fun, even though it sometimes gets a bad rap in that regard. Where would you all love for people to get in touch with you if they have questions or just want to connect with you professionally? Where can we send them?
I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. Honestly, I love looking through my feed, seeing what people are up to, what they share, learning about new organizations and what they're doing. I recently shared on LinkedIn that I was reviewing NAFSA session proposals for next year's DC conference, and I was so excited. They were so interesting, and there were new people in there, new organizations that I had never heard of. Lots of, we've done virtual programs, come learn about what we learned, which I think is a very hot topic right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a great space. And by sharing that, loads of other people also connected and saying, my session proposals were also amazing. I'm so excited. So it's such a great website. I like it.
Awesome. Second, Kyle, LinkedIn.
Yeah, I echo that, LinkedIn. And then I would just plug Gateway's Duty of Care Solutions. I'm on that team. So if any of this resonated with you, if you need some assistance getting started, making the case to your leadership, this is what we do. So we're happy to help.
Yeah, I said if starting from scratch or starting with the bare minimum is intimidating, I definitely bring in a team to help you get that started. You don't have to go it alone in our field. So I think that's great. Thank you both so much for coming on the show and sharing your amazing wisdom and experience with everyone. And we will see you all in another episode real soon. Bye.
Thanks, Brooke. Bye.